Filipinos are facing a surprising ban from US cities in 2025. Find out which 10 cities are now restricting entry for Filipino immigrants. 10. Houston. Life in Houston took a sharp turn in early 2025 when local enforcement began fully cooperating with federal immigration agencies. Filipinos living there started to notice unannounced visits, increased street patrols, and growing fear within their communities. What once felt like a vibrant and welcoming city quickly became a hotspot of anxiety. Families who had lived there for decades suddenly found themselves being watched. The trust they had built was beginning to crack under political pressure. These actions were driven by a newly implemented state policy encouraging local officers to report anyone suspected of being undocumented. Though not exclusive to Filipinos, many from the community were caught in the net due to outdated visas or minor paperwork issues. The rise in arrests sparked quiet protests, legal workshops, and emergency meetings at local churches. Community leaders warned, no one was safe without updated documentation. Even legal residents feared mistaken identity or profiling. Adding to the fear, social media exploded with videos of early morning arrests and workplace raids targeting Filipino-owned businesses. Some families left the city overnight, hoping to avoid becoming headlines. Local advocates scrambled to organize defense networks, but the damage to the city's relationship with immigrants had already begun. For many, Houston went from being a land of opportunity to a city of uncertainty. Trust was replaced with silence, and smiles with worried glances. 9. Phoenix. Unlike other cities, Phoenix didn't gradually shift. The change was immediate, cold, and calculated. With Arizona's long-standing history of strict immigration laws, the city became one of the first to enforce aggressive checks at workplaces, schools, and even public hospitals. Filipinos who had lived quietly for years were suddenly being questioned in broad daylight. Fear became routine, and even simple errands started to feel like dangerous missions. A controversial state directive gave officers the authority to detain anyone unable to verify their immigration status on the spot. This put thousands of Filipinos, many of whom were legally residing or in visa transition, at risk of detention. Filipino caregivers, restaurant workers, and students became prime targets. Many began avoiding public events, while others deleted social media posts that could reveal their locations. The atmosphere turned from tense to suffocating almost overnight. By mid-2025, rumors of a citywide list of suspected overstays surfaced, shaking the community even more. Filipino churches that once hosted joyful Sunday gatherings transformed into strategy hubs for survival. Entire families discussed contingency plans in case someone didn't make it home. The city that promised warm weather and economic hope had become a place of paranoia. Phoenix, once a destination of dreams, now served as a warning for what unchecked enforcement could become. 8. Atlanta. Atlanta didn't seem like the kind of city to tighten the noose on immigrants, but 2025 proved otherwise. Hidden behind its progressive image, the state's ban on sanctuary policies allowed federal agents to move freely, even in neighborhoods previously considered safe. Filipinos in Atlanta began reporting sudden home visits and ICE vans parked near schools. Fear crept into places it never belonged, like family barbecues and Sunday services. The situation escalated after a wave of workplace inspections targeted industries where many Filipinos were employed. Nurses, cleaners, and retail staff found themselves under intense scrutiny. Employers, pressured by new compliance checks, began quietly letting go of workers whose paperwork wasn't flawless. Some Filipino-owned businesses closed their doors overnight to avoid fines or raids. The community, once growing and thriving, started to shrink into silence. Local leaders called emergency town halls, but the damage was already underway. Longtime residents withdrew from public life, and newcomers skipped the city altogether. What made Atlanta particularly harsh was the speed and quietness with which it acted. No public debates, just actions. By the time the rest of the country noticed, Atlanta's Filipino community had already gone into hiding. A city of music, history, and resilience had turned into a silent battleground. 7. Las Vegas. Las Vegas, known for bright lights and endless opportunity, dimmed in the eyes of many Filipinos in 2025. The city saw a sudden wave of coordinated workplace raids, hitting industries where Filipinos made up a significant part of the labor force. From casino kitchens to hotel housekeeping departments, agents arrived without warning. What used to be routine workdays quickly turned into terrifying detentions in front of co-workers and friends. A new state partnership with federal immigration authorities allowed unannounced sweeps in both private and public spaces. Filipinos, even those with legal documents, began carrying copies of everything: IDs, work permits, visa papers, fearing they'd be stopped at any time. A local rumor about ICE checkpoints near popular shopping centers caused panic, leading many to stop going out altogether. Fear started to bleed into every corner of daily life. As businesses lost staff, some tried to speak out, but feared being targeted themselves. Filipino community centers offered crash courses on legal rights and emergency planning, but attendance was often quiet and tense. Las Vegas, once seen as a city of second chances, became a place of constant second-guessing. The Strip was still, flashing, but for many Filipinos, the lights felt colder now, like spotlights instead of beacons. 6. Chicago. Chicago has long been a city of diversity and deep immigrant roots, but in 2025, even this stronghold began to crack. Despite its sanctuary city status, federal authorities found legal loopholes to ramp up enforcement, especially in neighborhoods with large immigrant populations. Filipinos who once felt shielded by local protections began noticing unmarked vehicles, silent arrests, and unexplained disappearances. The fear spread faster than the facts. What changed the atmosphere was a sudden policy allowing cooperation in public safety cases, a term so vague it covered nearly everything. Filipinos with expired visas or minor offenses became easy targets. Many who had never even received a speeding ticket were now being summoned for questioning. Employers, hospitals, and even schools began quietly reporting inconsistencies in documents. Families started coaching their kids on what to say if someone came to the door. The most painful shift was in the tone of the city itself. Community events, once filled with laughter, became guarded and cautious. Social services saw fewer walk-ins as people feared exposure. Even long-established Filipino-owned shops reported sharp drops in foot traffic. Chicago hadn't banned anyone outright, but through silence and systemic pressure, it made many feel as though they didn't belong anymore. The message was subtle, but the impact was loud. 5. Miami. In 2025, Miami turned into one of the most aggressive cities for immigration crackdowns, catching many by surprise. Known for its multicultural vibe, the city took a hard turn when statewide directives pushed local police to report immigration status during routine stops. Filipinos working in domestic care, cleaning services, and hospitality suddenly found themselves under daily threat. Simple acts like taking a bus or walking to work became risky choices. The state's new law allowed random ID checks at job sites, gas stations, and public transport hubs. Filipino workers, even those legally employed, were interrogated about their papers in front of customers and colleagues. Some employers, scared of state inspections, began firing staff with the slightest document issue. Panic spread quickly through the community. Families started avoiding emergency rooms and legal offices, fearing exposure. Churches and community centers became the only safe places left. offering legal guidance and emotional support. But fear ran deep. Miami had always welcomed immigrants with open arms, but now it was pushing them into the shadows. The city's charm, beaches, opportunity, sunshine, felt distant. What remained was a tense silence, broken only by the quiet steps of people trying to disappear before someone knocked on their door. 4. Seattle. Seattle had always been seen as a progressive haven, but in 2025, reality hit the Filipino community hard. It wasn't the loudest crackdown, but it was one of the most surprising. Reports surfaced of Filipinos being detained at airports, despite holding valid green cards. Some were returning from family visits abroad, only to be questioned for hours and, in some cases, denied re-entry. Fear of traveling became a quiet epidemic. The confusion stemmed from a policy change targeting residents with old legal infractions, even minor ones. Immigration officers used outdated records to justify detaining people at the border. Filipinos who had lived in Seattle for decades suddenly found themselves flagged. The city offered legal assistance, but the process was slow and emotionally draining. People canceled trips, avoided airports, and stayed glued to their phones, waiting for news. Seattle's Filipino community had been deeply rooted, with decades of history and cultural contribution. Now that confidence was shaken. Events were cancelled, support groups swelled in size, and stories of airport detentions were whispered from neighbor to neighbor. Seattle didn't turn hostile overnight, but trust was eroded piece by piece. The fear wasn't just of arrest, it was of being erased, quietly and permanently. 3. Los Angeles, home to one of the largest Filipino populations in America, became a city of contradictions in 2025. While California promised to protect immigrants, federal enforcement quietly targeted specific neighborhoods with precision. Unmarked vans were spotted outside schools and clinics. Filipino families who had called LA home for generations suddenly felt like strangers, tiptoeing through streets once filled with community pride. The most chilling aspect was how selective the operations were. Agents focused on places where Filipinos worked in large numbers: hospitals, nursing homes, and construction sites. Even those with proper visas were taken in for review, leading to days in detention and missed work. Employers began requesting updated documents more frequently, often without explanation. The stress, fear, and confusion led many to stay indoors and avoid public life. Local organizations tried to fight back with legal clinics and awareness drives, but turnout was low. People were afraid to be seen. Social media was flooded with posts urging silence and caution. LA didn't ban Filipinos outright. It didn't need to. Through fear and constant surveillance, it made daily life feel dangerous. For many, the city of dreams became the city of whispers, where survival meant staying invisible. 2. New York City. New York City, often praised for its diversity, stunned many in 2025 by tightening its grip on immigrant communities. Though still labeled a sanctuary city, quiet partnerships between federal agents and certain city departments began to surface. Filipinos living in Queens and Brooklyn reported surprise visits and document checks at early morning hours. The city's fast pace now came with a new layer of fear that someone might not make it home from work. What made New York particularly unsettling was how invisible the shift felt. There were no public announcements, no big speeches, just quiet enforcement that slowly crept into daily life. Filipino nurses and home health aides began facing extra paperwork and unscheduled audits. Immigration officers started appearing near subway stations and outside employment offices. Even legal residents were pulled aside and questioned without explanation. Despite its history of resilience, the Filipino community found itself retreating from the public eye. Cultural events were cancelled, gatherings grew smaller, and conversations turned cautious. The city's promise of opportunity began to feel hollow. In New York, the danger didn't shout. It whispered from alleyways and waited outside doorways. Filipinos learned to move carefully, not because of who they were, but because of what they now represented on a government list. 1. San Francisco. San Francisco, once a symbol of immigrant hope and protection, became the epicenter of quiet fear in 2025. Despite its long-standing sanctuary status, federal agents launched early morning operations in neighborhoods with high Filipino populations. Families were woken by knocks that turned into detentions. Longtime residents who had lived in peace for decades suddenly vanished without warning. The shock wasn't just the raids. It was that they happened here. The federal government exploited legal gaps to override city policies, using national security as justification. Filipino workers in healthcare, retail, and food services were flagged through outdated databases. Even green card holders were being questioned for minor past offenses. The message was clear. Documentation wasn't enough. Fear began to silence voices that had once fought proudly for justice and inclusion. What made San Francisco's shift so painful was the betrayal of trust. This was a city that promised safety. And yet, it became a stage for surprise removals and shattered families. Community centers turned into legal triage zones. People stopped attending events, answering unknown calls, or opening doors after dark. San Francisco didn't just change its tone. It broke a promise, and the Filipino community felt it like a scar. So now you know what's really happening in these 10 US cities. Do you believe this is just the beginning of a larger strategy, or do you think Filipinos are being unfairly singled out? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear real stories, real fears, and real opinions. And where are you watching this from right now? If you haven't seen our previous video about the new US immigration rules for Filipinos, watch it now. It explains what's really changing and why it could affect even legal residents. And please share this video with someone you care about who might be living in one of these cities. They need to be prepared.